Healer meta just plain sucks. We've had Resto Druids dominating Mythic Plus ever since its inception. We've had Discipline Priests dominating raids ever since it was reworked in Legion, and we've had Paladins topping the healing meters ever since Glimmer was discovered. And there's no way to fix it in BFA, because the classes at a fundamental level are flawed, because each gains a completely different benefit from having more or less people. And yet Blizz thinks they can fix it with small number tweaks. Let's start off with the Holy Priest. Holy is in direct comparison to Disc, and at the moment Disc brings everything Holy does and more. For Holy to ever be viable, it needs to bring better utility in the form of a useful raid cooldown, which does damage reduction and not healing. It needs an external, which does damage reduction, and it also needs some form of unique grab to make up for its lost DPS compared to Disc. If it doesn't get all three of these things, then it always will be far behind Disc. Mistweaver is fairly okay in Mythic Plus, however it does lack some utility that's stopping it from being competitive at the top end. Most notably, it doesn't bring a battle res, which severely limits the amount of group comps that you can make. Also, it lacks a lot of CC when compared with Resto Druids, as it only has Ring of Peace and Leg Sweep as good CC options. Damage wise, Mistweaver is also subpar. For raids, the story is pretty much the same. They bring no unique utility, and their raid cooldown is a throughput cooldown that does almost no healing, and their external is an absorption effect which scales very badly for high keystones and for mythic content. And as such, Mistweaver has been unviable for the vast majority of BFA, outside of a few niche cases where some of their very unique utility, like Transcendence, has been useful. Resto Shaman, the most viable of the unviable heals. In Mythic Plus, they just don't bring enough unique utility when compared with the Resto Druid. Their short CD interrupt is good, but in most group comps you either have to switch it out a DPS with an interrupt to get a battle res, or you have to run an unholy DK to get an extra interrupt and the battle res. Either way, Resto Druid is generally preferred, as that doesn't lock you into having a battle res in your DPS slots. Raids, the story is pretty much the same. However, they do have a unique niche in doing high damage while bringing healing cooldowns for bosses where you want lots of cooldowns but low HPS, but this is very rare that you want this, and as such it's usually just better to bring a healer that heals and brings cooldowns. The only real unique utility in a raid is Ancestral Protection Totem, which is basically just a battle res. It doesn't count the battle res timer, and that's pretty much the only unique relevant raid utility. Besides that, they're lacking raid CDs, mostly a damage reduction cooldown. Like Link can be useful, but it's very niche compared to a proper damage reduction cooldown. They also lack a tank external of pretty much any description at all, and they really could use one here. And they also lack free damage while healing, which is pretty much the most important thing when comparing raid healers these days, as usually damage is the most important thing and healing is seen as a secondary. Resto Druid is in a rather unique spot where they're absolutely the best by far in Mythic Plus, but garbage tier in raids. This is for a multitude of reasons, so let's first off start with the healing style. In Mythic Plus, having the ability to layer lots of hots onto the tank lets you do lots of kitty weave DPS, meaning that Resto Druids provide a lot of DPS in that environment. However, in a raid, hots are really useless because random accidental healing from other healers will do the healing that your hots would normally do. Also, having hots doesn't necessarily allow you to do more damage because it isn't covering the gaps that are created in solo heal content by you doing damage. So hots in raids are basically just worse straight up than direct heals in pretty much all cases. However, in a Mythic Plus environment, hots can actually be a benefit. Second thing is how their mastery works. The mastery highly emphasizes stacking all your hots on one target, which is obviously easier to do in a 5-man environment than a 20-man environment. So this causes the problem where druids have a really high amount of healing output in a 5-man environment, but when they get to a raid and they have to heal 20 people instead of 5, they completely suck at it. The second thing to look at is their utility. Resto Druid brings a lot of utility that is only useful in a Mythic Plus environment. So the major one that most commonly comes up is Battle Res. This is extremely useful to have on a healer as it gives you much greater flexibility on the other classes you can bring. However, in a raid, it's useless because you'll always have at least a few Battle Res accidentally. As such, Battle Res is perfect in Mythic Plus, useless in raids. Then we look at their other utility like Vortex, Single Root, AoE Root, Typhoon, and those things, and they all have the same problem. That is, their CC that is great in Mythic Plus, but in most cases in a raid, the boss is immune to it, so they're useless. So they have a great CC toolkit that is only useful in Mythic Plus content. The other thing that is really important to look at is how their healing cooldowns translate into a raid environment. First off, in a raid, damage reduction beats any form of healing cooldown basically every time. And as the raid CD that a Resto Druid brings is a healing cooldown, it is pretty much complete garbage. However, they do have a slight the saving grace in that their tank external is extremely useful in the raid environment. When we look at their damage, it is also extremely bad when compared to Discipline Priests or Holy Paladins, as they do no passive DPS. As such, compared to a Disc or a Paladin, they bring similar amounts of healing, they bring worse utility, and worse damage. So as such, there is no reason to bring a Resto Druid over a Discipline Priest or a Holy Paladin unless there is some really unique specific utility that you want from them. Moving on to Discipline Priest, which is in the complete opposite situation to a Resto Druid. That is, that they're great in raids and suck in Mythic Plus. There are a multitude of reasons for this. So first let's look at their healing style and why it is raid centric. So Atonement heals a percentage of the damage done, and as the amount healed does not scale with the amount of players, this creates a situation where for it to be balanced with 20 players, it needs to be very weak for 5. So this has caused the problem where that they have to be extremely overtuned for raids to be viable in Mythic Plus, or they have to be okay in raids and thus completely unviable in Mythic Plus. As it currently stands, we're in the situation where they're unviable in Mythic Plus. As for their utility, the situation doesn't get much better in a Mythic Plus environment. That is because their utility is pretty much nothing. There is nothing that separates a Discipline Priest from any other healer in the utility department, and their major raid utility that they can bring in being Parrier and Pain Suppression are okay, but they're not anything to write home about. And finally, let's look at the Discipline Priest damage. Their damage is okay, as their toolkit is designed around doing passive DPS while healing. However, when you compare it to a Druid who does lots of active DPS due to their healing style, it is still far lower than a good Druid can achieve. As such, in a Mythic Plus environment, they do less damage, heal decently effectively as a Druid, and bring worse utility. As such, they're completely non-competitive in that game mode. For raids, the story is a bit different. Having a damage reduction cooldown and a good tank external and high passive DPS makes them an excellent pick for raids as well. Add on to the fact that they get the full benefit of their atonements and they become a prime pickup for almost every raid encounter. Holy Pally is in the same boat as Disc, great in raid but horrible in Mythic Plus. This is due to the same reasons as Disc. It brings high passive DPS, a good damage reduction cooldown, and sufficient HPS. However, in a Mythic Plus environment, it's a different story. They lack any unique useful utility while bringing lower DPS than the rest of Druid. Add in the fact that a Holy Paladin brings in neither a Battle Res or an Interrupt, and there is no reason to ever take a Holy Paladin over a Resto Druid in competitive 5-man content. As you can see, to balance the healers for all content, all of them are required to go under a serious rework that will only happen in the next expansion. As such, for the rest of BFA, Resto Druid will continue to dominate Mythic Plus, and Discipline and Holy Pally will continue to dominate raids. Part 2 will cover how they should fix this in the next expansion. If you've enjoyed my content, don't forget to subscribe, click the bell icon so you will know when I release new videos, click the thumbs up button, and don't forget to leave a comment below.